All right, so, um, I was talking about the tensions building up between the North and the South and the slavery issue. And basically, this is going to lead to civil war. So, as the United States is getting bigger, this slavery issue is becoming a really hot and contentious debate in a way that it hasn't been before in the past. Because there was a status quo in the past. And the new creation of new states and the debate over whether they're going to be free or slave is going to change. It's going to break up the status quo that was already somewhat fragile, right? And so, this is again. I want to remind you that many polls teach that the majority of Southerners now believe that the Civil War was not over slavery. You're going to learn that that is an absolute myth. It absolutely was over slavery, and there are some historians who still try to make a case that it's not. They're in the minority, and I think that they're quite desperate for it, and you'll see why. I've been holding back on really trying to make a statement on that just yet, but I want you to just kind of see that while there were other things that were making tensions between the North and the South, that the slavery issue just becomes such a extreme issue. And it just makes sense, right? Because again, that idea that a house divided cannot stand is true. It's just a very, it doesn't, the compatibility of trying to have a united states under a very extremely different sense of understanding the law is complicated. And this is the kind of the complications that were happening with not the same amount of tensions over gay marriage. If a gay marriage is allowed in one state and not in another, so you have a married couple in Florida, let's say that it's legal, well, let's say California, legal in California, and they go to another state and their marriage is not legal, it just gets kind of complicated. That's just for something like a marriage arrangement. Imagine then, something as big as slavery, okay? So I just want to stress that heavily and have you see as we go, especially into the 1850s coming up, how slavery is going to actually literally have battles, bloody battles between Americans before the Civil War over this issue, okay? And we'll talk about that. All right. So again, addressing the issue of manifest destiny, looking westward. What I think you really clearly see at this time is that Americans already were seeing the frontier as kind of, as their new Canaan, their destiny, right? But every time Americans keep pushing, they just keep getting more, and it just goes well for the United States. And so what's stopping them now? Like every twist and turn, the one thing you can say, if one doesn't believe in this morally, in terms of success, it's clear to see why Americans felt this way. All right, if winning makes gives you some sort of moral authority, then the United States had lots of moral authority. Okay, and so you even had a writer where we get this term in 1845, December 27. That's my birthday, by the way. I just noticed that for the first time after teaching this. How long? Anyways, it's kind of funny. Anyways, so John Lewis O'Sullivan addressed the ongoing boundary dispute with Britain in the New York Morning News. He argued that the United States had the right to claim the whole of Oregon. Remember, we didn't have Oregon at this time, or California, okay, at the time we're talking about, and several other states, which we're going to learn about. And he said, quote, "And that claim is by the right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence," meaning God, heaven, whatever, "has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government entrusted to us." This idea that our system is the best and that God, all right, wants us to keep spreading it, okay? And this leads us to the first kind of scuffle with Mexico. It's Texas, which was Mexico, a part of Mexico. So the United States tried to buy twice Mexico, and they didn't want to sell it. In the early 1820s, the Mexican government encouraged American immigration to Texas. And by 1930, there were about 7,000 Americans. That was twice the number of Mexicans. Here's the problem, and here's the irony. Mexico encouraged Americans to immigrate, but in order to become Mexican. I mean, they didn't want. In other words, they're saying is that we have open borders for you if you want to settle here under our territory, and we will integrate you into Mexico. One of the problems that Mexico suffered from, which is completely different than the United States, and this is something that you really need to pay attention to, what I'm going to say. They had a massive amount of territory and almost no bodies to fill it. The territories that Mexico had, and this kind of explains probably why the United States felt so bold to take land from Mexico. And let us be assured, we cannot kid ourselves. We took it, okay? But we took it because it was land that wasn't full. It was Native Americans there, but we were already disregarding them as people and having rights to land. So that's already an old topic. There were not enough Mexican people to make facts on the ground to really establish anything other than a theory, a legal document saying that here these lines are Mexico and here's like 3 Mexicans there or something, right? So for the United States, settlers could just start pouring in and there's no Mexican law enforcement to stop it. And then the Americans just say, well, we don't need Mexico. We're just doing what we've always been doing. We're taking land. All right. And so basically Mexico tried to ban immigration finally to stop it because they were seeing that American settlers were just coming to basically take away Mexican land. And by 1835, over 30,000 Americans, whites and blacks with their slaves, were in Mexico, not acknowledging it as Mexican territory. Okay, and that's kind of what I was talking about in this section here, is that American settlers were not acknowledging basically the sovereignty of the land belonging to somebody else. And also, the Mexican government made slavery illegal in Texas, as it was in all of Mexico in 1830. This is something we have to really come to terms with. Canada ended slavery long before, right? Because they were part of Britain. There was no civil war. There was no killing over slaves. Mexico, for all of its problems and everything that's gone on in Mexico, ended slavery legally long before we did. And so there were Americans bringing slaves there. That was illegal. But again, what am I saying? The settlers didn't care about the law. They didn't care that they were illegal immigrants. And they were actually taking the land by force. Okay? And they were bringing illegal contraband, as in slaves. Okay? And so this led to tension and fighting that was taking place in 1835. And the Mexican government then sent more troops into the territory. And the settlers were coming in and declaring independence from Mexico. Not that necessarily that was being sponsored by the U.S. government. They were doing their own thing. And this is the other thing that we have to remember. The United States kind of let settlers do their own thing and then didn't really have to like associate themselves thoroughly with them until settlers made facts on the ground, and then they could say, okay, well, we'll integrate that. It's kind of what Israel does with settlers right now in the West Bank. They know it's officially illegal for settlers to take more lands from Palestinians, and the settlers are, families that come in and they bring machine guns and they take over Palestinian homes, kick out Palestinian families, and then then the Israeli military comes to back them up and punishes Palestinians for attacking them, and then they build a fence around that enclave and create more and more land for Israelis. This is kind of how we did things. In a sense, Israel is a small example how they're expanding their land against the Palestinians in the way that we kind of did this here. I realize I just opened up a can of worms in a very controversial topic, But I have studied a lot on that, and the parallel works. You know, and it works for anything. You know, Northern Ireland, we are a settler nation, and we have to accept the fact that just like Protestant settlers in Northern Ireland, Israeli settlers in Palestine, and us here, we used there were guns used and the power of one state at the expense of another people to create these facts on the ground. Okay, that's just it's just and there's more examples around the world. Okay, all right. And so in 1836, settlers proclaimed independence from Mexico. And I want to talk more about that. So I'm going to end this lecture here, and then we'll go into a further discussion of that.